So I babysit sometimes, and the kid I take care of, about 8 years old, regularly gets upset about climate change. Not primarily about the fact that our world is figuratively and literally on fire, but mostly about the fact that it feels like he has to deal with a problem that he is in no way responsible for. He doesn't realize this yet, but this is a feeling that is most likely going to accompany him for the rest of his life. Tradition, death, debt, hatred, climate change, society, financial crises. Every single one of us knows the feeling of being influenced and maybe mistreated by the ideals, actions, and expectations of those that came before us, those that lived in this world before we did. What does this have to do with anime, you ask? Well, I believe that this theme, these ideas of an old, stagnant, hierarchical society that is completely willing to sacrifice a new generation just to maintain and protect itself, is one of the central themes of Jujutsu Kaisen. That's right. I'm back, and I am still talking about Jujutsu Kaisen, and nobody can stop me. In Jujutsu Kaisen, these bonds, these ideals, these societal structures that weigh us down are treated almost as if they were curses themselves. To illustrate what I mean, I want to take a look at Yuji Itadori. Yuji is a pretty cool main character, right? But when you look at it, he is in this position almost entirely because of the actions and ideas of a generation that came before him, of a society that has existed long before he was ever even conceived of. Yuji swallows a finger of Sukuna, which was sealed and locked away by sorcerers that came many years before him, that couldn't manage to get rid of Sukuna once and for all, and thus decided, for better or for worse, to inherit this responsibility to sorcerers down the line, and eventually Yuji Itadori. They presumably did the best they could, but ultimately Itadori is the one that will have to solve the problem that was, in part, created by previous sorcerers. Secondly, Yuji then gets sentenced to death by the elders of the Jujutsu Society for the danger he represents. It is important to note here that based on all the information we have, the Jujutsu elders don't mean the danger Yuji represents to the world as a whole, but the danger he represents for them. The return of Sukuna would shake the Jujutsu Society to its core, and Sukuna would most likely remove the leaders of Jujutsu Society right away. Think about it. Yuji gets sentenced to death by a society which he did not even know existed, because of circumstances that are so far out of his control that he doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell at understanding them. It is even mentioned that the other students can't see him as Yuji Itadori, but only see him as the vessel of Sukuna, an ancient evil that needs to be destroyed to maintain the status quo, regardless of the cost. In this way, even Yuji's identity is entirely swallowed and overwritten by actions and ideals of the past. Finally, and perhaps most importantly for this analysis, Yuji's journey did not start because of Yuji Itadori. At the beginning of the series, he's largely uninterested in helping others or even interacting much with them, and I think it's pretty safe to assume that, had nothing changed, he would have gladly ignored Fushiguro and the curse that was attacking his school. The catalyst that started Yuji on the path of helping people was his grandfather, or to be more precise, his grandfather's dying words. Yuji remembers this plea to help as many people as he can when he decides to go after Fushiguro, and he remembers it again when he decides to swallow Sukuna's finger to save the others. Yuji's grandfather's dying wish is ultimately, again for better or for worse, what drives Yuji to become a sorcerer, what jumpstarts his entire adventure. At one point, Yuji even directly refers to this need to save people based on his grandpa's last words as a curse that was bestowed on him. All in all, I think it's pretty clear that Yuji and his life are substantially influenced by the society and expectations and ideals that were there before him. Regardless of the outcome, these ideals take freedom and choice away from Yuji. He is thrust into a situation and can only react as a result. This theme repeats over and over in Jujutsu Kaisen, but it gets really interesting and unique only with 3 characters: Gojo, Maki, and Todo. All 3 of those 10 out of 10 characters have their story and their lives heavily interwoven with the structures of society, as well as the rules and ideals that precede them, but all 3 of them, in their own way, fight to break free from or even destroy these rules and ideals, and build their own new society with their own new rules. Let's start perhaps with the most telling one of all: Aoi Todo. Todo is a rookie sorcerer, and he is not from any well-established sorcery family. This makes him somewhat of an outsider, and instead of submitting himself to a system that would, and does, treat him like a second-class citizen, he decides to be himself, to defy these norms, and to grow in spite of the rules set upon him by literally the outside. Without going into too much detail about Todo, I think this quote he says to Mahito is most emblematic of his philosophy, as well as the philosophy of Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole. The sound of the Gion Shouja bells echoes the impermanence of all things. The color of the Sala flower reveals the truth that the prosperous must decline. However, we are the exception. As far as analysis goes, this quote is an absolute goldmine. The first part of it is from an old Japanese epic about the rise and ascension of different clans. The original quote speaks of the necessity that everything must decay, that no matter your strength, nothing remains of you in the end. Just like even the most beautiful of flowers wilt away, so will the strongest, noblest, and mightiest eventually return to the earth from which they came, and we ought to remember that. The second part, however, is not part of the original text. It is added by Todo himself. This addition goes entirely against the original idea of the text. Todo declares himself exempt from this rule. He declares that he does not fall under the law of decay, that he will never return to dust. This approach is almost absurdly arrogant and extremely fitting of Todo's character. Not only does he alter an ancient text with his own crude words, but he takes the original meaning and turns it entirely on its head. Instead of talking about the transience of all things, the verse suddenly means that while most things decay at some point, some, if they are strong enough like Todo, never will. By saying this, Aoi Todo subverts and denies the expectations of an older society. He, someone that entered the Jujutsu world from the outside, is willing, and due to his enormous strength, may be capable of changing the old ways, of taking the world apart and building a new one from the rubble. Similarly to how he took apart this verse's meaning and built a new, entirely different meaning from the words. Sure, things may fall apart, and sure, that might have been the rule for everything that has ever come before, but that doesn't mean that it has to apply to me or my generation. I will be different. I will bring change. I will use the rubble of an old world to establish a new one. A very different example of how the actions of the past are placed upon us like a curse would be Maki Zenin. As a member of the Zenin clan, one of the three great and leading families of the Jujutsu world, Maki was bound to be an important figure. Were it not for one small detail, she can't use cursed energy. She can't even see cursed spirits. For this reason, Maki and, to a somewhat different extent, her sister Mai live lives as two women shunned by their family. Maki eventually develops into an outstanding sorceress, but her family uses their power to keep her down and unsuccessful in the Jujutsu world, as her success would be a stain on the Zenin clan's history. In a very transparent way, the ideals of the past are here weights that are keeping Maki down, shackles that prevent her from being herself. She can only ever exist in her relation to her family, and even when she gets strong and well regarded, it is only to prove her family wrong. In a way, the existence of an old system has made it impossible for Maki or her sister to exist as themselves. In the manga, Maki continues to suffer, but she eventually begins her crusade of tearing down the old world. Just like Todo, she plans and begins to destroy that old system that was placed onto her. Finally, Satoru Gojo. Other than being incredibly cool, Satoru Gojo is the only known member of the Gojo clan, one of the three main clans of the Jujutsu world. So even if he weren't extraordinary, his fate would be tied to traditions and laws. However, being in the unique position of being indisputably the strongest sorcerer alive, Gojo lives by a different set of rules. His family's esteemed position in tandem with his incredible powers allow him a certain amount of leeway. He can save Yuji and he can insult people all over the place, but he's still bound by these old structures, mostly represented by Principal Gakuganji. His strength, however, also makes him a symbolic pillar, an object used to maintain the status quo. It is repeatedly mentioned and implied that Gojo's strength is the single most important factor in maintaining the balance between curses and humans, and he is, more often than not, spoken of as a nuisance that must be tolerated to maintain this world, a necessary annoyance and not really a human being. In these ways, in spite of being incredibly powerful both physically as well as in the role he plays in society, Gojo suffers from the old hierarchy. Ultimately, Satoru Gojo has his identity taken away from him. Instead of being Gojo, he is reduced to being the strongest, or a pillar of society, without any choice in the matter. Similar to Maki and Yuji, he is isolated and put into a category without his own choice. As a matter of fact, I believe that when Gojo talks about being the only honored one, a quote reappropriated from Buddha, I don't believe this to be a brag or an expression of his superiority. I think this quote is Gojo realizing his loneliness, the fact that he has been fully isolated by his role and his powers, bound to have an infinity between himself and others forever, regardless of what he does, because he has a role to play that only he himself can play. And he was given this burden, this curse, without his consent. So, Gojo also has a very clear interest in destroying and dismantling this system. He even fantasizes about simply killing all the elders that make up its foundation, but comes to the realization that nobody would follow him in creating a new world if he were to become a murderer. Instead, Satoru Gojo chooses to teach, to create a generation of strong, independent sorcerers to build a new golden age of Jujutsu sorcery together. Now, this theme doesn't just come up with these characters. It is, as a matter of fact, repeated in the characters of Jujutsu Kaisen over and over and over and over again. Megumi's stepsister controls his actions and in a way prevents him from being truly happy. Panda will always be seen as the odd creation of a madman instead of his own being, and Noritoshi Kamo literally blinds people and himself with the blood of his ancestors. This theme of a new generation being sacrificed to save the old one is most obvious and most cruel in the Star Plasma ritual, in which an actual young woman is sacrificed to stabilize Master Tengen, a Jujutsu sorcerer whose only role is to maintain the society as it is, without any change, without any risk, but also without any progression at all. If we think of Jujutsu Kaisen as a series about a new generation trying to create a new world, then the fact that this new generation inherits the world that came before with all its flaws, with all its issues, can indeed feel like one hell of a curse. And the rejection and destruction of these ideals can be understood as a sort of exorcism by themselves. Gojo teaching students to be strong and independent, and Todo becoming ridiculously powerful even though he himself isn't of this world, are both attempts to rid themselves of the curses that have been put upon them. By rebelling against these rules and ideals of the past, they work to create a world in which everybody can be themselves, a world in which they are not bound by the curse of the past. Now, this rejection of tradition can of course go wrong, and the story of Jujutsu Kaisen makes it clear that utter and complete rejection of everything that came before you isn't the correct way either. Gojo eventually gets cubed, Yuji goes against his convictions and kills someone, Todo loses his powers, and Maki pays a hefty price for her independence. From these stories, and from Todo actually taking an old quote and rebuilding it into something entirely different instead of just creating something new, we can deduce that the core idea of Jujutsu Kaisen is not in fact to completely ignore everything that came before, but rather to use the world you were given, take from it what helps you, and use those parts to create a better world based on the stuff that you were left with. So with that, we've reached the end of yet another video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a good time here. If you liked my video, do me a favor and subscribe to my channel. And if you feel like more of my content, you'll find a playlist with my other videos somewhere around here. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. All the links are in my description. See you soon. If we think of Jujutsu Kaisen as a series about a new generation trying to build a new world from a new